Hello and welcome to today's session on what's new for legislative liaisons in summer 2018. My name is Catherine Hinshaw and I am APA State Government Affairs Associate. I want to thank you all for joining today. We're also joined by Sarah Marchant, who is the chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee for the Chapter President's Council. And we wanted to take some time today to discuss some exciting developments for legislative liaisons coming up in the next couple of months. So just to get a feel for what we'll be talking about today, first we'll take a look at APA Engage and dive into how your group can use this new online communications and resource sharing platform. Then Sarah, the chair of CPC Advocacy, she'll share with you some of the resources that are in progress. And then third, I'll share with you some opportunities for legislative liaisons coming up at the Policy and Advocacy Conference in September. And then lastly, we'll have some time for questions and discussion. And I would really welcome for you to share any of the updates from your legislative sessions this year, successes and challenges. That's certainly welcome as a part of today's discussion. So to begin with some context for APA Engage, this platform was launched in the spring and APA has been working hard to get it up and running. So the legislative liaisons are now officially on the platform, which is really exciting. And this means that you will have access to resources created specifically to aid your policy and advocacy initiatives, as well as a place to bring related questions to the group. So if you have a question about a piece of legislation or a way to approach a certain issue, this platform is really the place to bring those discussions. And one last note before talking about the platform itself, you'll receive an email that will introduce you to the platform after the webinar, and that'll just give you a general overview. But for today's discussion, we're going to be focusing primarily on how this tool can be a convening point for chapters and their legislative leaders. With that, I'll go ahead and point out two important features for your group on this platform. First, I think really important is the discussion feature, and then second, we'll take a look at the library. And so to begin with the discussion board, this is where you're going to post questions or comments, much like you have done on the listserv. You may be calling for a recommendation on approaches to legislation, and members can reply to this with best practices and ideas. And I'll note that the discussion posts are the primary source of notification for the platform. So depending on your settings, you can receive notifications in a couple of different formats, including every time there's a new post. So that's going to be a really good tool for those sort of informal conversations. And then also there will be notifications there when there is a new resource posted on the platform itself. So moving on to the library, this is where the tools and resources for your reference are going to live. Sarah's going to talk about some of these specific resources in a minute, but for now, I'll do kind of an overview of the structure in its current form, just to get you familiarized with it. You'll see at the beginning here, it's broken down into policy issues and advocacy tools. And then if you click on the drop-down arrows, under policy issues and advocacy tools, you can see that there are additional subcategories. And the example that I've highlighted here is actually how you would access a resource under the housing section, specifically looking at resources available via the Planning Home campaign. So just as something sort of tangible for you to picture how you may access a resource. Right now, you'll see to the right of your screen, there are two links present, APA Housing Principles and the latest on housing and inclusive growth resources from APA. These are links themselves, so they were not actually documents. So that's one note that's a little bit different than some of the resources that you'll have. But what's really important here is that you click on this link. So if you click on latest housing and inclusive growth resources, you'll be brought to a page that isn't the resource itself initially. It's a description of what you're looking at, the file that you're about to open. And then you'll see at the bottom the link where you can either access the web page directly, or in many cases, it's going to be the link to download the document. So that's something really important in terms of mechanisms and operation, and also just giving you a better picture of how you'll be able to access the resources that will be available. And so I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what to expect on the platform. This is by no means comprehensive. There are lots of ways that you can use the platform, but the discussion and then the library are going to be kind of your two go-tos, particularly initially when you're looking at pushing things out on the platform. And one important thing to note here, as you're looking to see how it's broken down by issue: housing, infrastructure, small cell, autonomous vehicles, opportunity zones. These are all issues that we've heard from you are important and are relevant, but this is by no means permanent. We're working with CPC Advocacy and Policy Committee to make sure that this file structure and the resources that are put out here are truly beneficial to you and your chapter's policy and advocacy initiatives. So that's something to keep in mind as this resource begins to roll out for you all. This will change and grow as is necessary, but these are some of the things that we're starting with here. And so as you see these different issues broken down, it's important to know that you can also add a file or a link, just as I did yourselves. So you'll be able to, let's say there's a piece of legislation that per discussion on the discussion board would be really beneficial for your group as a whole to recognize. This is the place to put that piece of legislation, to actually put that document if relevant, and then from there you'll have access to that whenever necessary. So you know, this is meant to be an active platform, and like I said, we're working really hard with CPC Advocacy. They've been instrumental in getting this sort of structure and concept in terms of policy issues and advocacy tools uploaded on the site itself. So something to keep in mind is you'll be able to work with them as this grows and evolves. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah, and she'll talk briefly about some of the work that CPC Policy and Advocacy is doing, as well as more specifically about the resources that you can expect to see here in the coming months.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, everybody. Sarah Marchant. So just for context, I'm the chapter president of the Northern New England chapter, which would be Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And I am chair of the Advocacy and Policy Committee. We, as a committee, really focus on training, chapter capacity building, policy, and communications. And we are made up largely of chapter presidents, mostly current chapter presidents, and some past presidents that are still very interested in this topic and have some really great experience specifically on the advocacy side. So over the past couple years, this committee has surveyed a lot of the different states from around the country and all the different chapters to better understand kind of where each group is, where each chapter is, if it has an active legislative committee, if it doesn't, if they have lobbyists, if not, you know, where they are in the advocacy spectrum. If they do have a committee, you know, is it a standing committee that is very active, or is it kind of a come and go based on volunteers? And also, what kind of resources would be most important to somebody kind of trying to refocus down towards the state level and serve the chapters better. So from this information, we've decided for the summer, I guess, before the APA conference, the Policy and Advocacy Conference this September, to really focus on some resource development to make sure that we're ready to discuss some of this and put some tools out there to add to our new platform, APA Engage. So these tools that will be coming forward are just a starting point of some best practices and tools for chapters to use, again, interior, not looking at necessarily the federal legislation, but how to be better legislative advocates at their own state level. They're not going to be super specific because it's hard to, we don't know the rules in every state, but what we're trying to do is give you some really good tools that you can then dive deeper on in your own state. So the resources that we're looking at, the existing materials that we're going to update to refocus back towards the state level instead of at the federal level, would be the 7 essentials for communicating with legislators, the State Planners Day, a how-to guide, which will guide chapters through the process of having their own Planners Day at the state capitol, modeled very much after Planners Day on Capitol Hill in DC. If any of you have not had the chance to experience that yet at the end of the Policy and Advocacy Conference, I would highly recommend it. There's so much to be learned about how to go about an effective advocacy campaign there. And you can really turn that around with this guide to looking at your own state. And it's in draft form right now, but the goal is that it's not just read it once the first time and then you should have it figured out, that this is a reference that you could keep going back to throughout your process, because creating a State Planners Day is quite the process. And then the third one would be a state legislative workbook, and to plan kind of a game plan, a mode of attack for how you work your own state legislative sessions, and what you're focusing on this year or this session versus the second year of the session, or how exactly that you can position yourself for future years, talking a bit about the different aspects of being a good advocate at the state level. So those are the ones that somewhat exist that are being modified to be effective for local state resources. The other set of resources we're working on are brand new, and this again comes largely from requests. And so it will be a guide to forming a legislative committee. From the about 30% of our chapters don't have any legislative committee. A guide for developing annual chapter policy priorities. So you have a legislative committee and you actually want to react to legislation. How do you have good priorities to help that legislative committee be effective, to make sure that you're representing your membership? And frequently asked questions on advocacy and lobbying. This one will be focused on federal level advocacy and lobbying rules and regulations, as they won't be specific to states, but it is a really important starting point to understand what you can and cannot do as an advocate versus a lobbyist, and how to make sure you don't cross those lines. So all of these topics will be highlighted at the Policy and Advocacy Conference in the state-specific portion of the conference, and you can find them on the APA. You will be able to find them, not yet, on the APA Engage library structure, as Catherine had just shown you. So here are some of the other materials that we are looking to move forward with over the next year. The ones I just talked about are the priorities prior to the fall conference. These are some of the additional materials that we have heard that chapters would like and would find very useful. The tracking legislation is something that we're actively working on as well. But those are the things that are coming in the future. And if you have ideas, later in this portion, as we're in the discussion mode, if you have ideas or materials that aren't on this list that you think would be very helpful, we'd be very open to hearing what those are. And also, if there's other, besides materials, resources, in that list in the library that had some high-level topics like housing infrastructure, small cell, AVs, opportunity zones, we are looking for this to be a resource on topic-related information. So as Catherine was saying, if there's legislation in your state that you've been working really hard on or fighting for or against, say, related to some kind of disruptive technology that we're all facing, something about Airbnbs or something along the lines of automated vehicles or Uber, there would be a place that we could house legislation and examples from across the country, so that if you are suddenly facing something in your state, you have some places you can go to pull some quick resources, especially because so many things are fast turnaround in the legislative sessions. So with that, I'll turn it back to Catherine.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that helpful context about the work that you all are doing at CPC Advocacy, and it's really exciting to know that these things are moving forward, and I'm excited for you all to have access to these great resources. So kind of in connection with those resources that Sarah noted will be available by Policy and Advocacy Conference this fall, I did want to take a minute to talk about the conference and some of the benefits that the legislative liaisons have, specifically new this year at Policy and Advocacy Conference. So some of the things for those of you who may not have been before, this year the registration will launch June 27th. So that's coming up very soon, so be on the lookout for that. And it'll be September 23rd, starts on the Sunday, through Tuesday, September 25th. So mark your calendars and watch out for that registration launch. And for you as the Legislative Liaison Group, you'll receive a discounted rate of $95, so that's something to keep in mind as well as you're looking at your availability to attend. So in addition to those logistical details, wanted to go over some opportunities. For the first time ever this year, there's going to be state content that will be embedded into each session, in addition to some state-specific training that will go hand in hand with the resources that'll be developed, having some experts on the ground and people who've had experience with certain policy issues and certain advocacy techniques to really engage you on that. And then the second piece, many of you, or some of you, were able to participate in the Delegate Assembly at MPC this year and engage in some of the discussions around the equity guide. So at the Fall Policy and Advocacy Conference, there will be a really important discussion and debate of this Planning for Equity framework and then a policy guide update as well. So having many of you been engaged on this issue previously, this is another opportunity to continue that momentum. And then I'll also mention, importantly, that there's going to be an emphasis on the Planning Home campaign, APA's housing campaign, that's going to include state content specifically. So I know that this is something I've talked to many of you about that's really been an issue in your states and in your local communities, and so this is something that we're highly focusing on this fall. And then lastly, but certainly not least, a really important part of this conference that's included is the Planners Day on Capitol Hill. So this provides you the opportunity to meet in your congressional office and talk to them about some of APA's priorities at the federal level. This is, I think, also really important for those of you who are considering developing a Planners Day at the state capitol. Sarah mentioned that there's this guide in the works, but also in conjunction with this guide, seeing it sort of play out real time at the federal level in our nation's capital here in DC can kind of serve as a real life case study of how a Planners Day works, what a day at the Capitol can look like, and really be able to bring into context some of the policy and advocacy work that you all are doing, not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well. So that wraps up the sort of update and exciting developments for legislative liaisons this summer. But I did want to give you all some time, not only to ask questions, because I know a lot of this information is new, but also to bring forward anything that you all think would be beneficial for other legislative folks to know, whether it's something that was really challenging for your legislative session this year, something that's ongoing, or a success. Certainly welcome any of these comments. Logistically, you can either pop a question on the right side of your screen in your panel, or you can raise your hand and you'll be unmuted, and we can move from there. So it looks like I have one question about when legislative liaisons are up and running on APA Engage. So that is now, which is really exciting. It just rolled out a few days ago. So you are now available as a legislative liaison to access the APA Engage platform. As I mentioned before, you will receive an official email that welcomes you to the site, but you'll notice here on this slide, I've indicated that you can log into your planning.org account using your typical login. And when you visit My APA, you'll see the option to click on APA Engage. And so that will allow you to have access to the platform, and then you'll look under My Communities, and that's where you'll find Legislative Liaisons. So it looks like I don't have any other questions at this time. I would encourage you, this webinar will be available actually on the APA Engage site. It's recorded, and we'll have that uploaded for you for your reference. And for those who were not able to make it today. And then I would just encourage you to let us know if there are any sort of pressing issues, or as you were thinking about the ways in which you may want to engage on the platform, really just don't hesitate to reach out to me. As I mentioned, we're looking forward to this resource development and discussion platform to be really live and active, and so we're looking forward to building this out with you. And with that, thank you for attending, and have a great day.